You have way more potential than you're probably using right now. And I mean it. You can absolutely unleash it. This isn't just some motivational talk. The key isn't buried in a textbook or a fancy curriculum. Nope. It's actually a set of really powerful mental habits that, believe it or not, you can start building today. So, how do they do it?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, you look at these minds that have literally changed the world, and you can't help but wonder, do they have some secret that the rest of us are missing? Well, turns out they do, but it's probably not what you think. Forget about formal schooling or prestigious degrees for a second. The real secret is all about 5 specific habits. Think of it like a practical toolkit that these self-taught geniuses have used over and over again to master their fields. And in this explainer, we're going to open up that toolkit and look at every single one. All right, first up is a habit that just cuts through all the noise. It's the ability to look at a super complex problem and strip it all the way down to its absolute, undeniable core. This idea was basically the life motto of the physicist Paul Dirac. He was famously quiet, and his childhood kind of trained him for it. Get this, his father made a rule that all conversation at home had to be in French, a language Dirac barely knew. So instead of risking saying something that wasn't perfectly precise, he just chose to be silent. And that gave him a lifelong obsession with precision. And this is where it gets really cool. This habit totally shaped his work. Dirac didn't just memorize things. He would rebuild entire scientific theories from scratch. In 1928, this led him to this beautiful, perfect equation describing the electron. But there was a catch. It had an extra solution that didn't match anything known in the universe. Most physicists would have just tossed it out. Not Dirac. He trusted the core structure of his math, which predicted a positively charged electron. And guess what? Years later, antimatter was discovered. He was right all along. So, how can you build this mental muscle? Try this little exercise. Next time you're facing a complicated problem, just stop, look for patterns. And here's the magic trick. Try to explain it to a 3rd grader. Seriously, it forces you to ditch all the jargon and find that simple core idea. Write that down. I'm telling you, it'll completely change how you see things. Okay, so once you can find the core of a problem, how do you decide which problems are even worth your time? Well, that brings us to our second habit, and this one is all about courage. It's about diving headfirst into the biggest, scariest questions you can find, way before you feel like you're ready. So if Dirac's mind was all about compressing inward to a single, precise point, the physicist Freeman Dyson's mind did the exact opposite. It expanded outward. As a kid, he tried to calculate the number of atoms in the sun. Not for homework, but just because he was curious. His mind was just naturally drawn to the biggest questions he could think of. Dyson never waited for permission. He didn't wait until he checked off all the prerequisites. He just threw himself right at the cutting edge of physics. And because he did that, at a time when the whole field was broken into competing camps, he was the guy who saw that 3 different theories were actually just saying the same thing. He literally unified the entire field. The thing to remember here is that this is less of a skill and more of a mindset. You know that little voice in your head that whispers, "Oh, I'm not smart enough for this." You have to learn to recognize that for what it is. It's just a story. And your new mission is to prove that story wrong. Our 3rd habit is all about what you do when nobody's watching. It's about creating a space for deep, focused, even obsessive work. And nobody illustrates this better than the mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan. Ramanujan's story is just incredible. He grew up in India, had very limited access to formal education, and was under constant financial pressure. He was a total outsider to the established academic world. But his commitment was absolute. He kept losing scholarships because he flat out refused to study anything but math. To the system, he was a failure. But while he worked as a clerk by day, at night, he filled these notebooks with mathematical theorems that were just out of this world. Those notebooks were his private laboratory. His learning didn't happen because of the system, it happened despite it. So here's what you can do. Claim some private time and a private space for yourself. Get a notebook, open a document, whatever works, and just write down your ideas, especially the ones you think are silly or stupid. That private space, with no judgment, is where the real thinking happens. Okay, private work is one thing, but what if the system doesn't just ignore you? What if it actively tries to stop you? That brings us to habit number 4, using constraints and obstacles as the actual fuel for your innovation. The story of the mathematician Sophie Germain is such a powerful lesson in this. I mean, she lived in a time when women were just flat out barred from higher education. The constraints on her were about as absolute as they get. Her own parents tried to stop her by taking the heat out of her room at night, but she just wrapped herself in blankets and kept studying. When a new university opened, she wasn't allowed to go, so she got the lecture notes and started submitting her own work under a man's name. And eventually, her work was so brilliant that her real identity came out and her talent was just undeniable. So the real lesson here is a massive shift in perspective. Your job isn't to prove your doubters wrong. It's to do work that is so good, so solid, that what they think about you becomes completely and utterly irrelevant. You have to use your constraints as a reason to get more creative, not as an excuse to give up.
So, if you're finding the core, tackling hard questions, working in private, and turning obstacles into fuel, where does all that energy go? That brings us to our fifth and final habit, and this is where it all comes together. Real learning has to be tangible. It's about getting your hands dirty and letting reality be your teacher.
For a modern example, just look at physicist Sabrina Gonzalez-Pasterski. Long before she stepped foot in a top university, she taught herself by working directly with the real world. As a teenager, she built a working airplane in her garage, and then she flew it. And her story really shows the pattern that connects all of these thinkers. They didn't follow a curriculum, they followed their own curiosity. They started with huge questions. They got their thinking out of their heads and into notebooks and projects. And they let real-world results be the judge, not grades or other people's opinions. They were willing to fail and fail again and keep trying. So that's it. That's the toolkit. Find the core structure, dive into the hard problems, carve out that private space for obsessive work, turn constraints into fuel, and build real things. These aren't just some abstract ideas. They're practical habits you can start working on right now. When you really think about it, the belief that you can't do something big, it's just a story you're telling yourself. Every single one of the thinkers we've talked about chose to write a different story for themselves. So the only question that really matters now is, what story are you going to write?